As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, bring the puck deep, put pucks in deep. We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
A devastating week for the Ditsy's Dogs fantasy program, losing to the bottom seed in the conference, who didn't even set his lineup for the whole week. And Matt Leonardo roared to a 600-plus point victory. He's high on life right now. I am still recovering as we enter the new week, but Matt Leonardo joins us. Jonny Lazarus is coming up later on here in the show, but Matt and I are going to cover a few of the quick hitters in the NHL headlines, and then Johnny will take the rest of the show with us. Matt, what's been going on since we last talked here?
Nothing too much new, just a new and proper person on top of the standings for the Fantasy Hockey League. I can't really complain too much. But yeah, no, good overall training, watched some hockey most of the weekend, and celebrated, which we'll talk about later, a huge win for the U.S. World Junior team.
I have to point it out, you guys all laughed at me when I said Czechia had one of the easiest routes there, and everyone thought it was written off that Canada was moving on. Canada devastated by Czechia in the quarterfinals. We're going to save all the World Juniors talk for Jonny Lazarus to go through with us. But in the NHL, some chaotic goals in the last week. And the first one was in the Colorado-Buffalo game. Jared Bednar, ruthless in his press conference, and a couple of profanities that led to a few fines towards the Colorado side. But Zach Benson of the Sabres scores on the goal. Blackwood is injured during the play, so it comes in an interference-looking play where he's run over. The play moves on, puck's out of the way, so it's touched up. That's why the interference is waved off. But Blackwood is rolling around in the crease for at least 10 seconds after the collision before Benson finds the puck in the corner, tucks it in, and the goal counts. And Bednar was furious. His team comes back to win a 6-5 overtime victory after they were trailing 3-0. But Matt, your thoughts on that goal and what was it, an extremely strange goal? Now Blackwood as well out week to week and a key piece of that Colorado offense.
Yeah, and you mentioned chaotic at the start there, and there was nothing but chaos. It was pretty obvious that Scott Wedgwood was injured in the crease and was rolling around for quite some time. And typically a ref will blow the play dead, especially when the goaltender is somebody who's injured. But let the play go. Zach Benson ends up scoring, and props to Jared Bednar for really sticking up for his guy. I mean, he knew he was going to catch a couple fines with some of the profanities he said, but rightfully so. I think when your goalie's hurt in the crease, you have every right to be upset when the refs are going to keep the play moving on, and it ultimately leads to a goal. But, Buffalo is going to Buffalo. You had to know Colorado was going to come back and win that game in overtime. But, overall, just a really interesting decision on the ref standpoint to keep that play alive and continue that. But you hope for the best from Scott Wedgwood, and hopefully he's able to get back on the ice and share the net with Mackenzie Blackwood sooner rather than later.
The dumpster fire that is the Buffalo Sabres continues as they blow that 3-0 lead. They lose in overtime 6-5. The only benefit, they pick up 1 point. But earlier this season, they had a 4-0 lead against the Avalanche on home ice and lost 5-4 in regulation, so they cannot quite figure it out. And the Sabres slander can continue for now. Another crazy chaotic goal is the game winner in the Carolina-Florida game. And goaltender contact as Kasperi Kokoniemi rushes in on a fast break, falls down, and plows over Sergei Bobrovsky. The puck stays loose. Matthew Tkachuk plays the body on Kokoniemi and a couple cross checks, keeping him down in the crease, given his business for hitting his goaltender. Well, the play keeps going, and Jacob Slavin scores the goal. The stick of Bobrovsky was knocked out on the play. He has his hands in the air. Where's the call? Well, no call because Tkachuk has waved it off as he keeps Kokoniemi in the crease, and there was plenty of time, the ref said, for Kokoniemi to clear out. The Canes win the game.
And there's ample time if you watch the video. There's probably like 10 to 15 seconds from when Kokoniemi ends up slipping and running into Bobrovsky to when Slavin puts the puck in the net. And it's really interesting because, Bobrovsky wants a call. And yeah, if Kokaniemi just kind of lays there by himself for 10, 15 seconds. Yet you're probably going to get a call for interference there. But, Matthew Tkachuk does what he always does and is going to stand up for his goaltender as he should. But, he's laying down on him for 10 to 15. Like, it was way too long of a time. It was crazy to watch. I just saw the clip, and it was really interesting to see how the refs play that out. And I think they ended up getting the call right, because when you think about it, it's very similar to any other goaltender interference where whose fault is it that the goalie got run into? And originally, it was Kotkaniemi, but by the time the puck had crossed the goal line, you almost have to blame Tkachuk for the contact there. So I think the refs ended up getting the right call there, but definitely another chaotic goal on the slate last week.
Matthew Knies, the reason for your victory, an 80-point weekend in a series of the back-to-back. Austin Matthews plays both games. He's been in and out of the lineup, a reoccurring injury that he's saying might not be recoverable, at least for this season. Well, it didn't seem to affect the Maple Leafs, as Knies on that line goes for a 5-point outing in the game against Boston on Saturday, a 6-point weekend for him. And Austin Matthews, playing in the back-to-back, 3 points on Saturday against Boston, picks up 2 more assists on Sunday. The reason that your team is thriving right now, but also for the Leafs, how important has Matthews been keeping him in? Knies has been kind of up and down, a roller coaster, and especially on the fantasy front, talks about maybe being a droppable player without Matthews. All of a sudden, he's back. Knies is roaring again.
Yeah, and I think at the start of the season, one of the things that we had talked about was who's going to step up on that left wing with the Matthews-Marner line. I think being able to spread out their scoring between Willie Nylander, John Tavares, Matthews, and Marner is super important to show the amount of depth that the Maple Leafs have. But, the last couple of seasons, they've kind of rotated some guys up and down that left wing. You thought maybe Nick Robertson was going to get that opportunity early on, and he didn't really play to his full potential. And then, they had Kalle Jarnkrok up there for a couple seasons, and he really didn't do as much. But you're really starting to see Matty Knies emerge as a player, and the big thing is puck possession. There's a clip a couple years ago at development camp that kind of just showed his ability to win puck battles in the corner. And what it does for guys like Matthews and Marner is it gives them more opportunities in the O-zone with the puck. They're able to get the puck around and get it to the point. And it all starts by winning those puck battles in the corner. And the former Golden Gopher, Matthew Knies, is just so good at that. And he showed that both at the collegiate level, and he's really starting to pick that up in the NHL.
The Ottawa Senators, last time we talked, were roaring through their long road trip. Well, back-to-back losses to kick off 2025. They're now 4-4 in 8 of the 9 games before they will finally return home upcoming this week. The last game on the road at a struggling Detroit team. But the big story, Linus Ullmark and Travis Green saying this week he's not skating, and that was about all that came out of the statement. The projections are week to week, but no timetable for the Ullmark return. Is this a point where the Sens need to think about a trade for a goaltender, or do you have to have the mindset of just waiting it out and hoping they can stay relevant, which they've been doing throughout the time that Ullmark was struggling at the start of the season? They stuck it out through that drought in November, got real hot as of late when he was on that tear. But now that he's back out and it starts to be trending towards that struggle and they're coming back home finally, can they wait it out?
And it's super unfortunate for Ullmark, who is playing so well and had this Ottawa team in such a prime position in an Eastern Conference, which we'll talk to Johnny about as well, but it's kind of all over the place, right? There's so many teams that are in that 500 range that haven't really been able to differentiate themselves and make a push for one of those wild card spots that's now been opened thanks to the demise of the New York Rangers at this point. But I think if you're Ottawa, your time frame on whether you're going to pull the trigger or not on a goalie trade needs to be quick. If you think after the next 2 weeks, one of two things. One, Linus Ullmark is going to be out for a much more extended period of time. Or number two, that you cannot rely on the remaining goaltenders that are in that room, I think sooner rather than later is going to be pivotal for Ottawa to continue to push towards the playoffs. I think the big thing is really going to be, what are teams going to do to differentiate themselves in that, seed number 7 to 13 in that Eastern Conference right now. And I think if Ottawa is able to get that goaltending in a better spot, with the Linus Olmark injury, it's going to be very helpful for them to maintain that playoff spot that they worked so hard for. So for me, I think you kind of have a week or two window before you really pull the trigger, but I think a decision needs to be happening sooner rather than later.
We're going to step aside. Coming up next, Jonny Lazarus joins us here on the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. Pleasure now to welcome on NHL content creator and UMass color commentator Jonny Lazarus. Jonny, what's going on?
Thanks, Casey. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you guys having me. I still don't know what I am as far as title goes, but I appreciate the kind intro. Thank you.
Big piece of daily face-off as well, a key piece to Matt and my fantasy hockey success and upcoming championship rivalry, hopefully at the end of the season upcoming. But you've been all over, especially recently, in some big events around the NHL. Recently, the Winter Classic was where we wanted to start and talk about the event there. A disappointing outing for the home team and a 6-2 win for the St. Louis Blues, who smoked the Blackhawks off of home ice on New Year's Eve. First, just your overall thoughts, the atmosphere around Wrigley. What was it like being there? You got to skate out on the ice in the creators segment before the big event there. So obviously a pretty cool opportunity for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like the outdoor games. Obviously I think as fans, when you watch them on TV, maybe sometimes they can get old, especially one this year where it's already been done at Wrigley. I could see why, the ratings were down and the matchup obviously wasn't necessarily a must-watch matchup. But have you guys been to an outdoor game ever?
No.
I have personally. I went to
I guess
Classic.
ECHL.
You went to wait. You tell me which ones you guys went to.
I was out at the Winter Classic in Minnesota when it was like -40.
Oh my god, that was probably the worst one.
It was brutal.
Okay, yeah. And what about you, Casey?
I went to the Toledo Walleyes ECHL New Year's Eve game a couple years ago against the Indy Fuel. But
how was that? I remember seeing pictures of that and stuff. It looked cool.
It was a cool atmosphere. It was tough as a fan because it wasn't as much of like a spectacle. So it was more just the puck drop in the game rather than all the stuff around it. So
yeah,
from a viewing I was going to watch one of my buddies, it was a little tough to see the action. You're kind of just sitting watching on the Jumbotron.
Who is the buddy?
Conlon Keenan.
I don't know if I know him. He played Clarkson?
No, he was captain for Geneseo for a while, and then
nice.
He's been with the Walleye. I think this is his 4th, maybe 5th season pro.
Oh wow. Well, yeah. I mean, the outdoor games, the Minnesota one, I wasn't there, but I've heard that was by far just like the most brutal one to sit through. Like they usually are cold as shit, and that doesn't always make for the best viewing experience when you're at the game. But the whole day in itself and everything around it, it's just such a great family day, friend day, and I loved it being on New Year's Eve because it's like the start of the celebration, right? Like instead of bringing in the New Year with the Winter Classic, you're almost like leading up to the New Year with the Winter Classic and ending a great year. And that had a whole different feel around it. It was kind of like everyone's more excited for the game because they know that New Year's Eve and everything after the game is just a deep breath. And not just the people involved in the game. Obviously, fans are different. The one knock I would say is maybe don't have 13 NHL games total on New Year's Eve, if you want it to be the one big spectacle. But players also love playing on New Year's Eve as opposed to New Year's Day. Nobody wants to, not be able to celebrate New Year's Eve with their friends, with their family, and then have to go play a game on New Year's Day. So I think it's a player perspective too to have the game on the 31st. But the event itself, I didn't even this is gonna sound terrible, but I didn't even know who Smashing Pumpkins were. I don't know their music. I don't know if you guys know their music.
I do one song.
Yeah, people were shitting on me because the generational difference. I was pumped for Chance the Rapper, and all the older people I was with were like, "What? Do you have any culture?"
How was that live? Because on TV it was terrible.
Yeah, the sound didn't really translate that well. There was something going on with the microphone for sure. It wasn't great, but the energy was still cool. It wasn't a Chance the Rapper concert, but I still enjoyed it for what it was. But yeah, I mean, listen, Wrigley Field is one of the most classic ballparks you could find. Skating on the ice was incredible. Taking in all the views was awesome, and it's now the I think third or fourth outdoor like ice I've gotten to skate on, and every time you just feel like a 10-year-old kid. Like it's it's awesome. And when I was out there the first night, it was like raining a little bit, and like people were kind of complaining about the weather, and I was just like, dude, this is it could be hailing out here, and you have to drag me off, but it's something that I'm very lucky that I had the chance to do. And outdoor games, like if you have the chance to go to one, if your team that you root for is playing in one, I highly recommend going because it's awesome.
Yeah, definitely recommend bringing the hand warmers if you are going to be a fan and go to the games because the one in Minnesota was definitely cold.
I played in one in college. It was like I had to double up my socks. I had to wear like the thing that covers your face. Like it was freezing. It's hard to play in, but it's so fun.
Yeah. Now, did you get a chance to walk down the stairs that the Blues had to go to the locker room? Because I know like Toropchenko was having some struggles getting down the stairs. There's a couple of videos of a couple of the Blues guys getting down there.
Yeah, I did see that. I was on the Blackhawk side though, so there was no like tough staircase. But I know there's like a couple colleges that have that too. Like I think Michigan has like a pretty steep stairwell or staircase like to their locker room. Not sure about Notre Dame, but I've seen it before. And then I think Maine, like I think the women's rooms,
that one's a nightmare,
right? The women brutal. Like go downstairs, I think, right?
Yeah. Like it's almost like walking, like being a fan walking into that.
Yeah, you walk
the bench.
That's cool though. I think that's cool.
Yeah, I heard it was from a non-player's perspective. I had no problem with it, but I heard from the play. So we played there 2 years ago, I think.
But not the men, right?
Said it was a nightmare. No, it was our women's team that played out there.
Yeah, that place is sick.
Yeah. So shifting a little bit back to the game itself, again, a 6-2 win for St. Louis, a really dominant game for the Blues. And there's a lot of talks from many different people in the media afterwards about both what that meant for St. Louis and kind of what that meant for Chicago. From your perspective, did you think that was more of a statement with the Blues and kind of the direction they're going with Jim Montgomery? Or do you think it's more of a statement on Chicago and kind of what those veteran additions are really starting to look like for that team?
It's a good question. And my initial reaction was like, it's more about Chicago and how much of a mess they are. But I don't want to discredit what that win did for the Blues. Like, I don't want to take that away. But with Chicago right now, we have Pat Maroon come on our show once a week. He said like that was a game that they circled on their calendar. Like he said he felt like they lost the game 7. Because Chicago this year, if they're being honest with themselves, like they don't really have playoff aspirations, right? Like they want to be competitive, but I think they're also being realistic and they know they're not a playoff team. So a game like that, to show up the way they did, like they were embarrassed. Like Pat said it, like he said it was embarrassing. And, it sucks for Connor Bedard too, to have that spotlight for the first time in the NHL. Like obviously, his opening couple games was like a little media tour too, but to have that game, Winter Classic, and kids I talk to, at least the younger guys in the league, like you grow up dreaming of playing in the Winter Classic. And I know some of the older guys feel that way too, but Connor Bedard was what, like 4 years old probably during the first Winter Classic. He grew up around it. Like Pat Maroon didn't grow up around it, so it's a little bit of a different perspective. But for Chicago to shit the bed the way they did, like, that's more of a statement, I think, than St. Louis. Because to me, like if I had to put money on it, I still don't think St. Louis makes the playoffs. I think it's a good win for them, but the 8 teams in the West, like I don't know what the standings are right now exactly. If I look just quickly here, I know it's like the 2 wildcard teams are probably Vancouver. Yeah, Vancouver, and then Calgary's a point behind them. Like maybe Vancouver drops, but those other 7 teams, Colorado, Edmonton, LA, Vegas, Dallas, Minnesota, Winnipeg, like none of them are dropping. It's not happening.
Cam Fowler gets his 1,000th career game and 2-goal outing, including the opening goal, 140 into the game there. Talk about his addition to the Blues, and on top of that, with the offer sheets they brought in, does that make the Blues now a contender where they currently sit just 2 spots out of the wild card, 2 points back?
Contender is in Stanley Cup?
Playoff. Or let's do both. I wouldn't say Stanley Cup yet, but
yeah. I don't think they get out of the first round. I mean, like I just said before, like everything going on in Vancouver, they're a total disaster right now. So I could see them dropping. But St. Louis, yeah, they could squeak in. Like they have they have a good forward group. It's their D that's the concern to me. Like their D are a little bit slow, right? Like they don't have much speed back there. Who's their fastest defenseman? It might be Fowler now, honestly. It might be. Bennington's been good, but I just don't think that they have the steady D core, to really be a legit threat. They could squeak into the playoffs, like I said, but I think it is in Vancouver's hands to let it slip.
You hit a little bit on the ratings there as well, and good to know that from the fan perspective, at least, it was an exciting move to New Year's Eve. But the worst ratings ever for a Winter Classic in this year's TNT performance, a 2.5 rating on TV. Does this need to be a standalone event, which was kind of what you hinted to, but also for the future, is there anything the NHL can do to try to compete with the NFL taking over the holidays, the NBA trying to get in there, and now the college football playoffs expansion where they really did the exact same, taking over on New Year's Eve and New Year's now?
Well, I don't think the ratings issue was because of New Year's Eve. I think it was because of the time of the game, which was 5 p.m. Eastern, which is when people are kind of starting to start their night, I feel like, right? Especially on New Year's Eve, and the matchup. If that's a 1 o'clock game between the Panthers and the Lightning, people are watching that. Like the beauty of the Winter Classic on New Year's Day is you wake up, you go to the couch, you get food, and you watch the game. Like, and you're hungover for sure, whatever. Unless if you don't drink, that's fine too. But like, that's a part of that like New Year's Day recovery, laziness, whatever you want to call it. But if you start the game at noon or 1, like people can use that as the start of their day. Whereas like 5 o'clock, I can't think of a worse time. I mean, like especially with the USA Canada game coming up at 8 too. Like, I know that was one that people wanted to watch as well. I think the timing and the matchup is more, I guess, of the statement of the ratings than like the New Year's Eve aspect of it.
Yeah, and you had mentioned Florida and Tampa potentially playing each other. I know there are rumors that that's potentially going to be the next outdoor games coming around next year. If they're not each other, what kind of teams do you think, rivalry-wise and historical-wise, do you think make the most sense to match up against those two teams if they end up having some games down south?
Well, I know it, so I can't say it yet. But but it's going to be good. It's going to be good. There you go. And the whole thing is just to celebrate hockey in Florida and how much it's grown. But it's going to be good. It's going to be cool.
Awesome.
Move on to the World
Juniors. In the episode, by the way, I just can't give you the matchup. But I think it should be announced on Wednesday.
All right. Well, there we go. Big breaking news there. On to the World Juniors. The USA, for the first time in program history, is back-to-back World Juniors gold medalists, and an exciting overtime win over Finland there. David Carl now 2 NCAA championships, 2 World Juniors championships. Does this make him a future NHL candidate? And Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts today saying that he's going to be a guy they throw any amount of money, but he's made it pretty adamant that he wants to stay in the D1 picture. You're kind of around both realms. Do you see him at any point making that jump? And we talked about it on our last episode here with the coaching changes. There's just 4 coaches left in the NHL that have been around for more than 2 years. And obviously in college, you're pretty content with your position. He'd probably be able to stay as long as he wants. Is that a logical decision that you could see him making the switch to the NHL upcoming?
I don't know David Carl personally, and I don't know like his family situation at all. But we spoke about this on our show today, and Colby was saying like, how could you not go to the NHL if you're that competitive? You want to prove you can win at the highest level. The money obviously that comes with it, you can make, like $5 million a year over 4 years. Like, it takes a long time to get to that in college. But then my argument was, he could be the next like Jerry York. Like he could be at Denver for 40 years, or Jack Parker, and have Magnus Arena, I think that's what it's called in Denver, like even named after him one day if he stays there. Like I think he's set for life if he stays in Denver. And listen, I think some people also value the time you get with your family when you coach in college. Like NHL, you're obviously traveling like crazy. 3-4 nights a week you're on the road. Where college, you only play your games on Friday, Saturday. The rest of the week you're around your family. So again, like I don't know him personally, but I'd have to think it's a really hard decision for him to make, and it's tough because he never played in the NHL. I'm sure that was his dream to play in the NHL. So, who wouldn't want to be in the NHL? but the stability that he has at Denver, like he could be there for 30 years, and probably making close to 700K, which is, not a little bit of money. Like that's great money. And to me, that's something that would be a hard thing to give up. If you obviously the Stanley Cup is the ultimate goal, but who's to say it's not as sick to win 10, 15 national championships? I think that's awesome. Like he could be the best college coach in the history of the game one day. So I always lean more towards the stability in the college route just because of, what I've seen, I guess, from NHL coaches as of late. You can have a guy get one shot and that's it. And then tough to get a job again. But I don't know. I'm leaning more toward you should stick the college route and be, maybe one of the best college coaches in the history of college hockey. Like even basketball, you look at Coach K and Roy Williams and all these guys, these legendary college coaches, Coach Cal. These guys made a name for themselves and are in the Hall of Fame probably in basketball and coaching in college. Like David Carl could be in the Hockey Hall of Fame as a college hockey coach. I don't see why not.
Yeah, I mean he's already got a. Go ahead, Casey.
I was gonna say with the NIL money coming in now and all the new teams, you're gonna have the North Carolinas and the SEC schools. UNLV just showed what they can do. They're probably bound to go D1 soon. You gotta think the money in coaching NCAA is gonna be through the roof soon as well.
Yeah, 1,000%. Listen. Every kid wants to be in the NHL. I'm sure he wants to be in the NHL, and I'm not going to sit here and say it's a dumb idea to go to the NHL. But I don't know. I just think there's a lot more to it than money, I guess. I don't know.
And speaking of kids who are trying to fight for the NHL, we got to watch plenty of them at the World Junior Tournament, shine and show what their potential is. From what you were able to see, give us one player from the U.S. and then one from another team that really stood out to you from an overall prospect perspective of somebody who kind of showed up and really made a name for themselves at this tournament.
Yeah, it was tough for me, like being fully transparent. Like the 2 or 3 days when I was in Chicago, like I didn't get to watch like many of the games. So I missed the USA Finland game. I missed there was like one other upset I missed, I think, maybe one of the Latvia games. I know that Latvian kid, the Capitals prospect. What was his name again? You guys know his name?
The one it was the one forward on the roster.
He led the tournament in goals. Like he put himself on the map. Like I'm blanking on what his name is right now. I think a third rounder to Washington. We're number 9. It's just slipping my brain right now. But yeah, I know he was super impressive. I mean, from the guys that I watched the most, like I thought Zeev Boyum was unbelievable for the U.S. Cole Hudson, I got to do a UMass BU game like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Cole Hudson took that game over in the third period. BU was down 2-0. They came back. He had 2 goals in the third. His presence on the ice is just unlike anyone else out there right now. I thought he should have been the tournament MVP for U.S. over Ryan Leonard, and that's no diss to Ryan Leonard. Like I know them both personally. I love Ryan Leonard. He's a great kid, and he's a stud, obviously. I thought those guys were super impressive. Cole Eiserman's another one. Like, he really bought into his role as like the extra forward and didn't sulk. Kind of owned it and ran with it and had fun with it, which is really impressive. Funny enough, the year Cale Makar was in the World Junior, he was the 7th defenseman for Canada, and he like took over and they started playing him more. Like he was on that team as the 7th D, which is nuts. I don't know if that's like the apples to apples comparison, but something like that I think is pretty cool. And then, Czechia, I got to support my guy, Michael Hrabal. I thought he was awesome in net. UMass starting goalie, difference maker, upsets Canada 2 years in a row. Like no one's ever done that before. He was a stud and he's only 19 years old, and, he'll be in the NHL probably the next 2 years for Utah. So those are a couple of names that stood out to me. Trying to think who else, but that's really it off the top of my head. I didn't get to watch it as closely as years past.
How good Robble played in the NCAAs last year too, and in their loss where he was injured and stayed in, stood on his head for a couple overtimes there. He's going to be a star.
It was Denver that beat him, I think, right? Yeah, it was Denver.
It was. Yep. Yeah. Canada was the big story in the devastation where they lose to Robble and Czechia, and you're an American, so I'm sure that was as just as much pleasure to you as me and Matt found out of it. But 2 straight years that the Canadians haven't made it past the World Juniors quarterfinals, and this probably the most devastating for them as it's on Canadian soil. But I think this really puts a light on the media and especially the fans, where all the kids being interviewed throughout the whole tournament are kind of bringing up the negativity being brought their way. Is the road forward for Canada? What can they possibly do in future years to turn this around, where the development that the US has brought and the success of the national development program is obviously starting to be a big piece to the US hockey's success, but Canada has not been quite able to figure it out, especially at the junior level.
Well, I think a part of that too is leaving, significantly talented guys off the roster. Like that was the main story, right? Like they didn't put together their quote unquote best team on paper. I think that's kind of what the narrative is around Hockey Canada, at least with this World Junior. But again, like there's no country that does what the U.S. program does. Like it's unbelievable how long it dates back and how many good guys have come out of it. But it also doesn't take away from the other like junior leagues and how everything else is ran, because that program is still playing, in the USHL. They're playing college teams where I don't know if Hockey Canada were to do something like that, how it would take away from how much pride they take in their CHL teams and all that stuff and the talent that they showcase in that way. Like if they were to take the best 2022 guys out of the CHL and form their own team, I don't know if it would have the same impact like it does here, because I'm not saying there aren't as many fans here, but there, like people live and breathe their like OHL, WHL, QMJHL teams, right? So you take away that talent from those little markets, it kind of ruins that product a little bit. Where here, a little bit different. Like USHL teams have support. College, obviously, much easier because students are students. They're not just there to watch hockey. They're just there for the atmosphere, and they take pride in their university. It's a little bit different than like going to a game as a fan. So I don't know if Hockey Canada would ever do like an NTDP kind of program, but it's tough. I mean, yeah, it's tough. I think the US is finally like right there, if not a step ahead. And that's why we're seeing the merge.
On the same note there, with the new rules around the CHL, do you think that's going to be a problem for the NTDP, or is it still such an honor to play for the national program that those guys are going to choose not to go to the CHL route and stay in Michigan versus maybe the CHL taking some of the talent away?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think there will be one kid to try it. I think there will be one. And maybe that's just a kid who's unhappy with his role on the team. If you're playing third line at the NDDP, you could still probably be a first liner in the OHL. Remember these like the top 20 kids in the entire country. Like, they're unbelievable. So I do think there will be one, but I never got to do it, so it's hard for me to say. But like, there's nothing quite like playing for that program and being a part of that, the access you get, the training you get, the experience you get. You're going to school with all 20 guys, you're in the gym with all 20, like you are, not to sound cheesy, but like you are a family. So it's a little bit different. And everyone I've talked to that's been a part of that program has loved it. So I don't think it would take anything away, but it's going to hurt the USHL probably, I would say. I think more kids now, want to go over to Canada and play in the CHL as opposed to like playing the USHL. If they can get the best of both worlds, why not do it? But hopefully someday, what I have been preaching is that there's like one elite North American junior league where the OHL or, the CHL and the USHL merge and just make one elite junior league. And it makes it so much easier for the NHL to scout, for colleges to scout. And it's kind of just like one avenue, even though it's part of the beauty of the kids who make it from different paths, right? Like, I brought Cale McCarr's name up. He played in the AJHL. Like that's tier 2 hockey in Canada. So there will be, those oddballs that don't necessarily play in the top league that, develop a little bit later on that make it. But if we can simplify it a little bit to have one elite league, I think that'd be pretty cool.
Before we get back into the NHL stuff, you're around UMass, who was one of the big playmakers in that CHL NIL rulings this summer, where they were one of those teams that went full scholarship, 26 guys on the roster, everybody will be full scholarship. And that was kind of right around the same time that AIC folded their program, pretty close down the road from you guys there. What is the upcoming future landscape that you see in Division I hockey?
That's a loaded question. As far as like how many more teams, how many more conferences, that kind of stuff.
Teams, effective players on the junior leagues like USHL obviously is going to be taking a hit. Small schools that don't have, I got probably with UMass being a full scholarship team, that's where you're around. What impact do you see on the smaller schools that aren't going to be able to do that?
I mean, I don't think it's not gonna change the way that the smaller schools recruit. Like they know what they're up against, right? And that's not changing whether a kid gets a scholarship or not. Like I'll be my freshman year I had a 50% scholarship at UMass. Like, and my parents were like, this is the school you gotta go, you gotta go here. It wasn't a full ride. But I think people know the opportunity they're going to get at the bigger schools, and I think some of them at least are willing to, if they can, like, pay for it if they need to. Like I think most kids would prefer to walk on at Michigan and be a part of that than maybe, and this is probably a dumb take, and maybe most people wouldn't agree, but then like, maybe get a 75% scholarship or a full ride is tough to deny. If a small school offers you a full ride, I think 10 out of 10 times you take it. But there are a lot of schools that offer 50 and they can cut it up in different ways, to spread out more scholarship money within teams. So the little schools or smaller schools, I should say, like those Atlantic hockey schools, like, they're going to recruit the older guys still. Like they'll find 19, 20-year-old guys in the OHL, like the overagers, the ones who are aging out that are, looking for a spot to land. Like they'll still find those guys. It's just the committing kids at 16, 17, the younger guys, like that's not going to change, I don't think. I mean, it's tough to say because I'm not going through that recruiting process, but I imagine it'll be similar to what we've seen. Like, scholarship or not, people always want to go to the big schools.
You spend a lot of your focus around the New York Rangers, who have been a big talking point around the NHL and the struggles they've had. But since the turn of the new year, 2-1 in 2025, wins over Boston and Chicago, the one loss to the red hot Washington Capitals. They're 4 points out of the wild card right now. Shesterkin is on the IR. Do you see the Rangers still being a contender? It's pretty much the same team minus a couple pieces that we saw win the President's Trophy and make it all the way to the Eastern Conference Final, but a much different look as we sit entering January here compared to the last couple seasons.
I mean, as this roster stands currently, I don't think so. I don't think this team makes the playoffs, to be honest. And as it stands right now, I don't even think I want them to. I don't see them getting past the first round, and I don't think it does them any good to make the playoffs. I think they've come to terms with the fact that it's not good enough. And, I think a retooling or a change in identity needs to start. So they have cap space room. They have like $8 million available. They claimed Arthur Kaliev today. And if they can try to find more pieces, like, they need like that Calgary, Florida trade. Like we've seen it. Even when this group is at their best, yeah, it's good, but it's not good enough. So I think they took a long, hard look in the mirror this season, because even when they were 12-4-1, they didn't look good. So I think management has understood that things need to change, and I don't see them making the playoffs. I don't.
And I think one of the things that we talk about a lot on our podcast is the fact that, the Rangers are out of that East. And early on, it felt like those 8 East teams that were in last year are going to be the ones similar to this year. So now there's an opening, right, for, a lot of teams that are in that log jam of just around 500. Of the teams that are kind of in that mix, whether you think of a team like Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Columbus, there's a ton of them in the Metro. And then you even look over to the Atlantic, right? You've got Ottawa, Montreal, even Detroit is still kind of around that spot. Which team do you think separates themselves from that and really starts to become a buyer at the deadline? And which teams are starting to sell house come February and March?
I don't know what the cap space looks like for Ottawa, but I imagine they're going to be super aggressive. This is a team that has not had a lot of success over the past few years. Everyone knows that. I don't think they've made the playoffs since that 2017 conference final run. So if I'm the Ottawa Senators, I'm going for it. And with Linus Ullmark in net, if he's healthy, like he's a difference maker. So I'm just looking right now. It looks like they have $2.5 million in cap space. So they could probably make a decent move at the deadline or add a decent piece. But if I'm the Ottawa Senators, I think it's got to be them. Columbus, I don't think they're in any rush. They're just happy they're competitive. Pittsburgh would be interesting. Obviously, Dubas has been known to be a little bit, I don't want to say like risky, but aggressive maybe is the better term.
Yeah.
And who wouldn't want to see Sidney Crosby back in the playoffs again, right? So I think I'm rooting for Ottawa, though. I really am. Like, the Ottawa Senators fans, they're so passionate. Like, I remember the Ranger playoff series against them. Like, that building was rocking, and I'd love to see a playoff game in Ottawa, to be honest. And I got a buddy on that team in Shane Pinto, and I'd love to see him get some playoff hockey under his belt. And, Canadian market, who wouldn't want to see that?
That makes two of us here on the show, and Matt's not one of them. We got to bet them if they make the playoffs. Matt's got to drive up and come to the first round because we're about an hour from there from Clarkson.
I want to go, too.
I know. So hey, we'll have to meet up there for sure. Yeah.
I thought they were going to make it last year. I took them to make it last year. I was disappointed in them for not making.
You'll have to text Pinto about the skate guard on his blade.
I was giving him shit today.
That was pretty good.
What did he say? He said, I think he said it actually hurt. Let me find the text. He said, where is it? Where is it? Takes a lot of people today. He said, haha, that actually hurt.
Or not to root for Brady Tkachuk to be another Tkachuk in the playoffs. But back on the Rangers side, it sounds like you are kind of hoping they're on the more selling side than the buying side upcoming. What trades could you reasonably see? We've already seen Trouba and Kakko out the door. Maybe also add your thoughts there on those two trades. But upcoming, what can you possibly see for them trying to turn it around or at least looking towards the future? It sounds like Zibanejad and Kreider could both be on the move. And I've even heard as far as Fox, which I think would be a crazy guy to move out with everything he's brought and the youth that he's still got, the long career upcoming.
Yeah, well, Zibanejad is a full no move, so like that's going to be tough. Kreider is a no trade, no move, so that'll also be difficult. Like there's so much that goes into these trades. You can't just like turn it over at the snap of your finger. I don't see them trading Fox either, but I think Lindgren's going to be on his way out. Riley Smith will be on his way out. Jimmy Vesey might be on his way out, and those guys are all upcoming UFAs too. So, I imagine the Rangers would want something in return for those guys. Zibanejad, I don't see him wanting to leave, to be honest, unless something crazy happens. I know he loves it here, his family loves it here, and people want to do right by their family. Obviously, what human being wouldn't? So if we're being realistic, I would say it's more Lindgren, Smith, and Vesey. If they're able to get a Mika trade done, that'd be great because right now he's been the biggest problem. And I don't know what's going on with him, but there's something that's clearly missing mentally right now. It just doesn't seem like he's engaged. But I don't know who's going to take him, right? Like even with the Vancouver Canucks, everyone's talking about JT Miller and Pettersson. They got to trade one. Who's going to want him right now? With everything going on, like does anyone want to bring that to their team? Especially a team that's going to make the playoffs. Like if the Rangers aren't hoping to make the playoffs, maybe, but I don't know. It's a lot more complicated, I think, than we all think as fans. Like there's so much that goes into it, and a lot of thought put into these moves, and it's a lot easier said than done.
On the Vancouver side, that was another one that we talked in depth about last week, and the Miller Pettersson drama just continues to stay around, and as much as they've tried to deny it week after week, it's still there. One, do you see a trade for one of the two upcoming by the deadline here? Two, the question that we argued about last week, if you had to pick one of them, who would you deal between Miller and Pettersson?
Well, I think Elliot Friedman reported it like that. I think the attitude they have is like grow up and suck it up. right? Like that's what it sounds like because both guys are signed long term, and they signed those contracts. Again, I think I'm just reiterating what Elliot said, knowing that the other one would be there. So I don't think they're in a rush to trade either one. They're still in a playoff spot right now, so we'll see. Again, I could be totally wrong. But if I were to trade one of them right now, it's tough, right? Because JT's like 31, Pedersen's like what, 26?
26. Yep.
26. So if you're looking at age and looking at term, like I think they're both signed through like 2030 maybe, so like another 5 years. I don't have the year in front of me, but I know they're both
signed the 8-year, I think. So he'd be through 33 or 4.
33. Yeah, so they're both signed long term. I mean, I think Pedersen's the safer play to keep, but Miller is the better player right now. So if you're thinking more long term, probably Pedersen. But if you're trying to win these next couple of years, you got to keep JT.
Alex Ovechkin is back in the lineup and continues to roar through this season. 5 points in the 5 games since returning, and 4 of the 5 points on goals. Now 19 goals in 23 games that he's played. And with 43 games remaining this season, just 24 goals needed to pass Wayne Gretzky. The Capitals continue to thrive. They're number 1 in the East, number 3 in the NHL, and just 2 points out of a President's Trophy position. Ovechkin in that race, it seemed like it was completely over when he fractured his tibia. And after 4 to 6 weeks on the Fritz, is right back in that position. Is that something that is remotely possible? Obviously,
Yeah,
he continues to be a freak of nature. You think it's happening?
He's doing it. How could he not? He's doing it.
So is the question when at that point?
24 away, right? With like 40-ish games to go.
24 with 43 to go.
Yeah, he's doing it.
I'm looking at the schedule right now. I'm thinking,
come back down to that last week.
Yeah, I don't know when, but like, I don't think it's going to be like the last game of the year. I think he'll get it with like 5 games to go. Like he's on that hot of a pace right now, and again, like he gets a couple empty netters too. Like he's out there for empty netters. So that's been sneaky helpful.
Last game of the year at Pittsburgh on ESPN. I'm starting to think that's not a horrible one against Crosby.
Yeah, that seems to be the popular pick, right? I think everyone's kind of anticipating that one. I mean, if it gets to that and he's 1 goal away from breaking it and that's the game, that'll be the most slammed prop bet in the history of sports. But I don't know. What do you guys think of the question? Like, do you have a problem with the record-breaking goal being an empty netter? Because I kind of think the anticipation of him being out there with the empty net would be nuts.
Yeah, I don't. It's still a goal. It count like some guys make their money on being empty net. He's one of them. He's a weapon that is on the ice every time they.
But if you're playing against him and your goalie's pulled and he's got like 1 away from the record, like
he's probably
imagine
triple
someone dives in front of it. Like imagine diving in front of the net to block it. That'd be
nice. If I were playing, I would.
Yeah.
Considering that I have no goals and will never come close to one in the NHL or NCAA or probably bantam hockey at that rate. But
also, this is just the way I think too.
You still got to score them for it to. It's still an outstanding. Gretzky had empty netters in there too.
Yeah, I also think again, this is just me. If I were an NHL goalie and I was playing against him, I would almost just let him do it because that's a goal that you're etched in the history of hockey. If you're the goalie that lets it up,
right,
I'd be fine. I'd be fine giving up that goal. It's sick, It's like literally hockey history.
Right, exactly.
Gotta try and steal the puck.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. That'd be so cool.
We always like
that's
to
why
throw
I'm
in
on the NHL. I'm not that competitive.
Exactly right. We always like to throw in a couple of bets to finish off the segment, and then I'll let Matt ask your upcoming futures pick. But any games you got first this week or any futures bets that are interesting at the current standing of the NHL for you?
I don't know what the Rangers' odds are to miss the playoffs. I imagine it's minus, but I would take them to miss the playoffs. I would take Ottawa to make the playoffs. I would take. I'd take Toronto to win the East. I don't know who I'm.
Does Toronto make it out of the first round?
Yeah, I think they're gonna win the East. They were my President's Trophy pick going into the year, actually.
It's in good shape right now.
Yeah, they're 3 points back, right, from first.
They just
Right,
need the
yeah.
West to settle down and start beating each other up.
Yeah. Those are just the ones off the top of my head, like futures wise. Trying to think of anything else. Like, I think
Yeah,
Leon's
it's
gonna
not
run
here.
away with Rocket Richard. Obviously, I think he's like 6 goals ahead now from everybody else.
Ottawa's minus 150 to get in. Rangers minus 290 to miss. I'm surprised it's that low.
Yeah. So what are the odds to make it?
It
gotta be
is
low.
180 plus 180.
plus 235 to make.
Oh, 235. Wow. Yeah, I don't know.
Does that
What do you
change
guys have?
Does that change your pick? In make misses, I've been rolling the Ottawa train, but the problem with that would be in looking at the odds, I think I would rather back the struggling Rangers team. But
And
it's
Ottawa?
tough to say I think Ottawa gets in.
Yeah.
I would say I would rather take Pittsburgh to miss, which is at minus 200 than to
Not
See,
great.
if I'm taking one team
hate-
in that middle group, like I talked about, I think I mentioned on the pod last week too, but like I'm gonna bet with Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang, who've like done it before, and Dubas is always aggressive, right? Like I think if there's any team in that middling ground that's like gonna sneak into that wild card and get their tires kicked in by Toronto in the first round, like I'll bet on Crosby to get there at the very least. But especially with the odds at plus, I don't mind that.
Columbus at plus 700, I would almost take over the Rangers the way they've been playing. And they're
Yeah,
only one.
I like
point
that.
out right now.
I like that for
Kind
value.
of a sneaky in for Gaudreau.
Yeah,
They've been playing good.
I like the value.
Matt, you want to finish it off?
Yeah, I mean, we asked most of our guests this. We're in the middle of the season here, coming into the new year. You mentioned Toronto as your President's Cup choice, but current Stanley Cup pick, and then maybe a dark horse team that you think is going to make a pretty deep run coming into the Cup this year.
I had Dallas before the season started as my Cup winner, so I'm just going to stick to that, just because I think they're very well rounded. Obviously, I think a couple of guys have had a slow year, but hopefully they can pick it up and figure it out come playoff time. Like Wyatt Johnston and Jason Robertson haven't necessarily been on the scoring tear that they have in years past. So I'll stick with Dallas. And then, what was the question? Like, which team is sneaky?
Just a dark horse, yeah, you think might make a deep run at it.
Tampa.
St. Louis.
Tampa Bay. I mean, they're
Both
always
wild card
competitive.
teams.
Done it before.
Yeah, always competitive. Never talk about them in the regular season. Jake Gensel stepped in and been a really good fit. Vasilevsky's still one of the best goalies in the league. Great decor, solid power play. Nikita Kucherov still in peak, performance. Braden Point, another great performer. Hagel's having a great year. Sorelli's having a great year. They're pretty complete. So Tampa would be the dark horse for sure.
Would you look at Dallas at plus 500, 7 points out as a pick to win the West?
In the regular season?
Yep.
Yeah. For sure.
Love it. All right. Jonny Lazarus. Johnny, where is the next big event you've got coming up as we close it off here?
This is a crazy couple months actually. Going to Vail this weekend to play against like the Vail Yeti men's league team, which would be pretty cool. Then I'm going to like Western Canada end of the month for like a pond hockey tournament out there, and then got some stuff in the works for Four Nations, so that'd be pretty cool. But thank you guys for having me, Casey, Matt, appreciate it, and happy to come on here whenever you guys need me, and hopefully we can meet in person soon.
Oh yeah, we'll see you up in Ottawa, and Matt loses his bet. And
I'd
has
love
to make the
I'd
trip
love for
up.
that to happen. I'd love for that to happen.
Huge thank you to Jonny Lazarus and a big piece of the NHL's content creation. Check him out on Twitter and Instagram as he travels all over following the NHL, and hopefully we'll run into him as Brady Tkachuk and the Senators make their way through the NHL playoffs upcoming. We'll see. It's pending Linus Allmark's return, I think. And what a better way to finish off the show here than making Matt upset. And Matt is not a pleased man with the new news that came out Sunday. And Frank Vatrano with an extension in Anaheim. That's not the reason that Matt's upset. The Anaheim Ducks inked a 3-year, $18 million extension, and some complications in there. Those sneaky Ducks. According to Pierre LeBrun, Vatrano will be paid $3 million per year in base salary. $9 million of the contract out of the 18 is deferred, and the payments will start in 2035, 10 years from now, where he'll make $900,000 per year for 10 years as the Ducks receive a benefit of having to pay just $4.57 million AAV in cap hit rather than $6 million AAV. And the good news for Vatrano, after he retires, he can get paid in his plan to live outside of California and whatever state tax that is. So probably likely a Texas or Florida or no state income tax section where the $900,000 will be a little bit more valuable to him. But Matt, you are furious at this contract.
And yeah, so for those who don't know, I do have an accounting and finance background. So when I saw this and I saw Vatrano got an $18 million by 3 years and somehow was going to hit Anaheim at 4.57, my head was boggled. So I did a ton of research to look around and kind of see some of the perspectives of others here. We'll start with Vatrano, right? Because there's a couple of things from Vatrano's perspective that I think is interesting. One, I think it is valuable that he will be getting payments after retirement. I think a big thing for NHL players is after getting all these contracts and having that annual income, sometimes it's a hard stop for them, and not getting those, checks post-retirement can really have a huge impact on players, not only in the NHL, but in every league. We've seen some of the tragic stories of players that kind of live outside of their means post-retirement and then are unable to support themselves and their family afterwards. So I think from a Vatrano's perspective, that's definitely a big pro. But, time value of money is all I got to say about in terms of, deferring $9 million now and getting it paid out until 2045 is absolutely absurd if I'm thinking about this from an accounting perspective. And then you look at it from Anaheim, and this is where stuff gets really interesting, because it's like, I was looking at it, I'm like, okay, trying to do the math of like, where does that 1.43 million end up hitting Anaheim at some point? It just doesn't. Okay. So they're going to pay Frank Vatrano $18 million. They're only going to get hit for it about $13.5 million, which for me is just a complete loophole in the system, right? Like, and we've seen deferred contracts before, whether it be Seth Jarvis, Jacob Slavin, Jake McCabe, which all happened last year. I think the big start of this was the Shohei Ohtani deal, and they saw what the Dodgers were able to do with that. And a lot of leagues are probably going to start going that route because it does provide a ton of benefits for the team themselves. Obviously, being able to expense something 10 years from now, it's going to be less valuable than if you're expensing it today. But the thing for me that frustrates me is the fact that they're able to sort of hide that $1.43 million each year. And like initially my thought was, okay, they're going to have some sort of cap hit, 2035 to 2045, and when they're actually paying salary to a player. But that's just not the case, right? It's about the actual annual value, and based on time value, it brings that down, about $1.5 million. I think the NHL is going to have to step in at some point and make a rule about this, right? Because what's to say that a team can't do this for half of their contracts, right? What's to say that they can't do it for 90% of their contracts? And some of the markets where high state income tax makes it more beneficial for NHL players might be able to go in and make higher offers, right? You could get somebody, say Vatrano was going to fetch 3 years at $13 million to go play for the Lightning where they don't have state income tax. Well, here you go. Here's an $18 million contract. It's going to hit the cap less for Anaheim than it's going to hit for Tampa, but they get the competitive advantage of paying $5 million extra dollars. So for me, I think the NHL has to do something to step in here. And, there's a ton of people who are upset about the LTIR issue. And I think this is just as much, if not more of an issue, where you're going to have competitive advantages just based on local tax laws, which I think shouldn't play a major impact in the way that teams are able to sign players. But one thing that is going to be interesting, we talked about last week with Buffalo, right? Like New York's notorious for having a very high state income tax. Does Buffalo become a team where maybe market-wise they're not so lucrative, but they can pay him an extra $5-10 million in deferred money and, make a more financially better offer to NHL players as opposed to, competitive teams that are in a state, whether it's Nashville, where they don't have state income tax, or Florida, Tampa. There's a ton of teams that, complicates things. And then you bring Canada into it too, which it's just a lot of complications. If you're 16 to 18 years old and you want to get in the professional sports realm, go become a lawyer, because they're between this and NIL and Bitcoin getting paid for people and people being able to invest in players. It's absurd, right? Like, I think if you want to get into the league as fast as possible, go become a lawyer. Didn't have the effort to go to law school, but my business law minor and my accounting background has gotten me this far. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what precedent this Vatrano deal sets for the future of NHL contracts.
In the upcoming CBA, this could be a piece of note, and you wonder if it's enough time between where there's rumors it might be signed by the end of the Stanley Cup this year. Well, this is a big loophole. And as you mentioned, that Anaheim goes. Think about Toronto too, would be the place I would immediately go to, where they have unbelievably high taxes and the pressure of that market. If they could do some things like that, ownership would be willing to pay the extra dollar for the amount of revenue that the Toronto Maple Leafs bring in. Where are the biggest concerns and the accountant lawyer in you has in this?
Well, I mentioned a couple
or what
of
could they do to fix that as well?
I think it's similar to the way that we have, either buyouts or retention on trades, right? There's a limit to the number of players, or there's a limit to the percentage you're allowed to take off of that contract. And it sort of balances the playing field for some of these teams that, if they could, I guarantee you Chicago and Detroit back a few years ago and San Jose would still be retaining on like 12 different players' salaries at this point, right? Like, it was a super lucrative advantage to be a third team deal, especially when the cap was stagnant during COVID. The amount of deals that we saw come up and have like a third team involved where, player A gets traded. I think it was maybe Nemesnikov was one of them, for example, where he got basically flipped from, I think it was Tampa over to San Jose, and then from San Jose immediately shipped over to Winnipeg, right? Plenty of deals you can think about when the cap was stagnant that had occurred. And, they put a limit on that, right? You can have 3 players' salaries retention. You can only retain 50% in total, right? I think just something to make sure that that's an even playing field. Because, we've talked about some of the benefits, right, for teams like Toronto and the California teams. But what about a team that's futures uncertain, right? Like, could you imagine if Arizona had done some of these deferred contract deals and now they don't even have a franchise, right? Like, I think the legal implications of where that would go for some of these teams that are, they might not be able to give out deferred payment contracts because they don't know if they're going to have the revenue 10 years from now. So I think it's from a business perspective, it's a very interesting route that I think owners and teams need to be careful of, but also for players, I think, at the service level, there are some benefits to having some of those long-term payments, and it is case by case. But I think, when you think about how much money is worth today versus it is in 20, 35, 45, it's the first thing you learn in accounting school. So I think it's going to be definitely interesting to see kind of how this shapes the landscape. And I think it's just another, interesting tidbit of ways that owners and GMs and some of the lawyers that are around the NHL are finding ways to be smarter.
Something we'll keep an eye on. You mentioned Ohtani. No coincidence that Frank Vatrano is a member of Anaheim, which is right down the road from the LA Dodgers. Last one that we'll hit on, and we'll close it up, tie a bow on the show, episode 22. Jonathan Toews, the captain and longtime captain of the Chicago Blackhawks, hinting that it might be time for him to return to the NHL and put an NHL jersey on. The quote reading, "It's too long of a story to share from here, but for almost 5 years, I've been searching for a way to heal the inflammatory and immune system issues that took me out of hockey." He went on to say about the Chicago Blackhawks, there's no hard feelings between him and their franchise. Nothing but love and gratitude towards the Blackhawks. At the end of the day, it's a business, and it's a business where you want to win games. And for him, it's an exciting time too. not knowing really what is around the corner for him personally, but at the same time, it is a time for a new start. Matt, that sounds a lot like a guy who thinks he could be getting back into it. And obviously, a long road ahead. We've seen Gabe Landeskog and the struggles that he's had to go through, but a player with 1,067 career games in Chicago, 883 points, named the captain in 2008, and since then, 3 Stanley Cups in 2010, 2013, 2015. Is this something you have your eyes on or just a flash of news for the time being?
I'm interested for 2 reasons. One, I am really interested to see, what's his skating level at, right? He had been dealing with it for 5 years, the inflammatory issues, and even his last 2 years with Chicago, when that roster was pretty much decimated, still over a half a point a game from the center position on a team that really did not have anyone left there when Tays had finally called it quits for the Blackhawks. I think it'll be super interesting to see what his tryout would look like and kind of where he is at from a skating level, because obviously taking a year and a half off of the game is really going to impact your ability to skate, especially at the professional level. But I'm really interested as well because I think there are a ton of teams, whether it be injury or just roster construction, a lot of teams could use a middle six centerman who can win a ton of faceoffs and be in the right position. A lot of teams could use a 36-year-old guy who's a great locker room presence, who's been a captain for over 10 years in the NHL and has the experience of winning 3 Stanley Cups. If I'm any team that's in that race, I am getting on the line for Jonathan Toews as quick as possible, right? And I think the big names that came out originally, right, he's from Winnipeg, so you think the Jets, who are a contender, and you might not need somebody up the middle with kind of how they've been playing, but I don't think Jonathan Toews hurts you on your third line, right? I don't think you're going to break up the Niederreiter line that they've been going right now. But I think, if Toews is offered an opportunity to play substantial minutes, whether it be on the PK or even in that second power play option, I think that could be a lucrative spot for him. And then you look at Toronto. Matthews is uncertain in terms of if he's going to be able to play, long term. He's going to be in and out of the lineup probably until the playoffs before he tries to tough that out. If you can get some additional scoring down the lineup from a team that notoriously has had issues scoring down the lineup, and especially a guy who's, going to be in the right place in the right time and has some of that winning playoff experience that the Leafs could definitely use, I'm super interested in seeing if this little tidbit of information goes anywhere. But, you root for Jonathan Toews, right? A guy who, a huge face of the NHL for quite some time. And whether it be, winning the 3 Stanley Cups or being a full-time Blackhawk his entire career, like, it's a guy it's very hard to root against, even as a Canadian here in the U.S. So for me, I'm more than excited to potentially see Toews wearing another hockey jersey coming up here for the playoffs.
Las Vegas Golden Knights, another team that was termed by the Spit and Chicklets guys as potentially an LTIR low-end minimum contract signing bonus to bring in a ringer. Think about
And that would
Tomas
make me sad.
Hertl, your guy who's now this year been a big piece of their success there. We'll have to keep an eye on Jonathan Toews and see if the captain is on the moves. Maddie, you're continuing your marathon chase here, but the weather is not a fan. It's getting quite cold in the Northeast. How is the marathon programming going as you're battling the bitter cold?
A lot of extra layers is the key, but you can't overdress. It's a really odd dynamic, right? So if you really bundle up at the start, yeah, you're warm for the first mile, but then you're at a heat stroke by mile 4. And then if you're underdressed and you don't realize it until mile 5, you're in a tough situation. But got on the course this past Saturday actually, and was able to run the infamous Heartbreak Hill, which was my first time doing that. For those who don't know, Boston's super hilly, so getting on the hills is super important, and was able to do that and end right over by Fenway Park, which was a lovely view. But yeah, no, things have been going great. I'll probably try and run in the cold and the dark after this call and just continue the stretch. Today's Monday, so we're X amount of weeks away. I should have the number in my head at this point, but I think it's around 15 weeks, maybe 105 days till Marathon Monday in my head. So could not be looking more forward to it.
What do you do when you find yourself in the middle of Fenway, which is probably what, 30 minutes from your house? Are you just Ubering to a random location on the course and running X amount of miles down the course and getting picked up somewhere?
Yeah, the team Ubered over to the T stop out at Riverside. So
Oh,
it was
you got
about
a team. That's right. You're running with a group.
Yeah, so there was about 30 of us that all split different Ubers, and we all stayed at the train stop out at Riverside, which is this massive parking lot that's probably 10 miles outside of the city, and then a little mile warm up to get onto the course, and then pretty much just ran Commonwealth Ave and Beacon Street, which is two pretty notorious streets out in Boston that are on the marathon course itself. That led us over to the a PT Spot joint ventures over in Fenway. So definitely, it's funny to see on my Strava. You'll see like kind of just like start and stop in the middle of nowhere, but it all makes sense when you're actually doing it. But for an outsider, I think even the fact that I'm running more than 5 miles in a day sometimes doesn't click so well with others. But it's been good so far. No complaints with the body as well, which has been great. So happy to continue to keep going on it.
I'm still waiting for the Strava follow at Casey Ditzel, and
Hit me back.
we'll
Come
see
on
if
now.
that one ever comes. I'm lacing him up today. You've motivated me. I'm going out for the first run of 2025, chasing you on the marathon watch.
Love
But
to see it.
any other big events coming up this weekend for you?
Not that I can think of. I'm skiing this weekend. It's my first time on the mountains. So if I come back with a full body cast, you'll know why. I never skied before, but hopefully my mediocre
Never
ice
skied
skating
before,
skill.
and he's getting on skis for the first time 3 months before the marathon.
Hey man, I'm not gonna let the marathon stop me from living my life, and I also feel like I'm gonna be okay. I feel like I'm gonna be decent, because if I go in here saying I'm gonna be bad, I'm gonna be bad. But if I like pretend I could be somewhat okay, I think I got a better shot at least making it down the mountain. But we'll see how that goes. We'll have updates next week if I'm still around.
We'll see. And maybe 2 weeks away from your television broadcast debut, still working on getting Matt to put ink to paper on that, but potentially a big upcoming Clarkson women's hockey broadcast on the 17th and 18th. We'll stay tuned there. But until then, buddy, it's been a pleasure. Episode 22 of the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. We'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good one, everyone.